at one point I went through induction. I worked for a UK based company, and I went to a Manchester United game, and an incredible atmosphere. But I use that as an example of the red versus blue as a distraction, right? Red versus blue in sport, just like in politics, just like everywhere else. Basically, the fiat matrix has plenty of opportunities for us to distract ourselves, be it Love Island or any variety of other things that they give us to focus on other than what might be an important conversation. Because, dare we enter into those waters, then you end up on a podcast talking to each other about the worst, most dystopian outcomes possible. But I think this is a feature of the Matrix, not a bug, right? They want us distracted. And then when you start paying attention, they want you paying attention to what they want you paying attention to. And then we just become like, a jar of ants where they're shaking the jar and we're fighting with each other about nonsense instead of fighting with whoever the invisible hand is shaking the jar.
Yeah.
Everyone's already agitated because, to your point, they're stealing from us, right? I mean, I think instead of just debasing currency, like, look, the one thing that we have as sovereign individuals that is finite, truly finite and scarce is our time. And here we are going through the matrix, exchanging this perfectly precious asset for paper money that's like monopoly money, literally. It's the worst trade in the history of trades. We're trading something which is, like I said, perfectly finite for an infinite paper money. Of course we're agitated. We're storing our life energy into this thing, which sucks. And then when they print twice as much of it, they are literally stealing the life energy that is our only scarce asset, right? So we're already agitated. To your point, many people don't even know why. Of course, you're on a treadmill and they keep ratcheting up the speed and the pitch over, slow enough, right? Even slow enough, you'll eventually recognize, holy shit, like I can't breathe and I can't keep up with the treadmill. Like that's eventually what happens. So even when people aren't paying attention, they know they're agitated and pissed. They know they can't buy eggs or milk like they used to. They know that, like, my dad used to be able to buy, a sports car for $3,000 that now costs $120,000. It's like, and it's not because people are greedy necessarily, like the manufacturers, right? It's the fact that, like, the money itself in the last 100 years, US dollars have lost 3% of their value in the last 100 years. That's like the worst performing shit coin there is. It's literally fundamentally worse than Dogecoin, like the US dollar. It's nuts. And yet we're all like, kind of blind to it unless we're paying attention, to your point.
It is worrying that people aren't paying attention at the same time. I mean, it does concern me. But then there's the other side of me that just thinks about there's this online trend. I don't know if it's Instagram or something like that, but there's this online trend basically that goes, it's people taking a video of like them watching the sunset, or just being out for a walk in the park, or cooking some food and having a nice time with some friends. And it's like, I almost forgot this is the whole point. And sometimes I wonder, are we worrying about things that are so far beyond our control that there's no point in worrying? Should we just crack open a couple of cold beers and be like, well, it is what it is,
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two schools of thought there. One is like certainly touching grass, smelling a sea breeze, all of those things. You hope we're not already in a simulation like Elon Musk has said, because then that would just be a really interesting part of the code. But I mean, look, I love getting outside, getting off devices, beyond the currency stuff. Really what I think it boils down to is third-party manipulation, right? Whether it's currency or AI, obviously, they don't even know what it's doing to us to get us to just constantly have face on screens. It's just programmed to have us be eyes on screens. I think, one, you could just say, hey, this is out of my control. I'm just going to enjoy the ride while I'm here. Ultimately, that's all good and fine until that planned obsolescence goes so far that like you can't even keep up with the property taxes to maintain your home here in the United States. Like I always say, yeah, it's great if you own your house, but you never really do own it. You know, they're going to ding you for property tax. And if you don't pay it, they're coming to take your house. Right. So, I mean, at some point you got to feed yourself. You got to pay somehow for a dwelling, or for gas to get around. Like when those things become so punitive, you're left without an option, but to be like, what is going on here? Like, and, you know, for me, as much as I seem worked up about, you know, this third party risk over our currency and therefore over our behavior, you know, I feel like I have found the answer for me anyways in, you know, a currency that is not controlled by any third party centrally, and one that can't be corrupted and printed infinitely in Bitcoin. And that gives me actually the warm fuzzies where I'm like, hey, no amount of voting is going to get me out of this red versus blue dynamic. They're just two wings of the same bird, right? I'm just voting for more printing of money, no matter who is in there, right? So I actually feel like by opting out and breaking my stake, I'm doing the one thing that will allow me to truly appreciate going outside and running my hands through grass, or feeling a good breeze, or, you know, watching a sunset. Like, you know, when I have something that I feel like is sound that whoever they is, cannot manipulate, I feel like that becomes something that you can focus more on, not less.
So obviously you're talking about Bitcoin, but I wanted to go back just a little bit to the discoupling of gold from the dollar, because a lot of people obviously point at this. You know, the What Happened in 1971 website is phenomenal, which I will get up actually while I'm talking. But
basically, when the U.S. first defaulted on the global currency peg, we defaulted against the world.
So I guess I was hoping like I could get your take on what happened then and why it was so important.
Yeah, I mean, what happened then was it's an inevitability when you give any third party control over money. In fact, this was in no way new. When the first kind of paper gold-backed currency existed, I don't know if you know this, but it was actually goldsmiths, right? So goldsmiths had, you know, once upon a time, the safest storage of gold, right? And if you and I were in a town and I wanted to transact with you for your goods or services, I had two options. I could either go to the goldsmith, take my gold receipts to them and say, can you please give me my gold? At which point they'd give it to me. I'd come to you. I'd hand you however much gold you needed. You would then take said gold back to the blacksmith or goldsmith, deposit it. They would give you a receipt as well. Well, we wisened up as humans, and I would just give you the receipt from the goldsmith. That way I didn't have to go and you didn't have, but we trusted that the gold was there. Well, spoiler alert, this was the first instance of breaking the gold backing to a paper currency when the goldsmiths started issuing more receipts than they had gold deposits on hand to satisfy. Now, if you do that little by little, you and I out here in the world don't know that. We still think we're transacting with these receipts and that they're sound because we could go redeem gold for them. But lo and behold, blacksmiths or goldsmiths do this enough and people are wising up. They're like, wait, something smells off. Boom, first bank runs in the history of bank runs, but it was goldsmiths. Fast forward, right? The government comes in and says, hey, these goldsmiths are not to be trusted. We can be trusted, however. Just give us all the gold stores. We'll issue you receipts just like the goldsmiths did back in the day that can be redeemed for gold. But they did the exact same thing that goldsmiths did. They had too many things that they wanted to fund. They wanted to derive certain behaviors and provide incentives for them. But how do you get around that when you don't have the gold reserves to do it? Well, you just issue more money and you disregard the peg. Like I said off the top, this is tantamount to defaulting, right? We had a contract with the world that everyone could peg their currency to the U.S. currency because the U.S. currency was pegged to something sound. If you look at the history of the value of a U.S. dollar since 1971, I mean, you want to talk about gasoline on a fire. It was already starting to erode ever since, frankly, 1913, when the creature was born on Jekyll Island in the Fed. But outside of that, it's been like throwing gasoline on a fire. And, now it's like I said, it's meant that every paper currency across the world is nothing more than monopoly money. Yet we're under this grand hallucination like it's actually worth something because, somebody will accept it for, goods and services. But ultimately, when you stand up for monopoly board, that money is worthless. It's the same thing as fiat. It's just we're under a mass hallucination.
I mean, you could say that we are still in that game. Our tokens are still, transactable whilst we exist within the global.
Absolutely. But Josh, I would say this, like, at least in cryptocurrency world, right? These projects, these Web3 projects have to publish. This is the amount of outstanding tokens. This is the total possible volume of tokens. This is the issuance schedule. This is how, if you stake them, blah, blah, whatever the rules of their tokenomics are. If the United States was forced to do that for fiat, or insert any country here, it would literally be the worst altcoin project and no one would buy it. Dogecoin has better tokenomics than the US dollar, right? Here we go. The US dollar coin, infinite possible supply, 96% of it owned by 5% of the holders, right? We can issue however much we want, whenever we want. You have to stake yourself to it by taking on debt. And if you default, good fucking luck. I mean, literally, it's the worst of the worst, right? But the government doesn't have to do that. And here we are just like participating, right? Again, this is why I call it the Matrix, right? To your point, we're still very much in this. I pay my mortgage, right?
Good news, everyone. My book about GameStop, the craziest story ever told, is now finished. Well, almost. Still waiting for the final draft. So, in the meantime, I think you should look at pre-ordering it or any one of the multiple fantastic, beautiful t-shirts that I have designed in order to sell with the book. Thank you, everyone, for your patience over the last few years while I have been finishing it very slowly. And I am really, really excited for people to read it. Link is in the description below. Enjoy the podcast.